With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Mem Gimel. We left off on Daf Mem Gimel, Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amud. Let's quickly recap. We began the Mishnah on Daf Mem Beis. The Mishnah says that one may not on Shabbos put a utensil under a lamp because many times a little bit of oil will spill over or spill out of a lamp. Person wants to capture that oil. And as we explained yesterday, the oil, for 2 reasons, has a din of muktzah. And the Mishnah says that on Shabbos you may not move a keli in order to receive oil which is muktzah. Now we have, and as again we're going to continue the sugya today, 2 different ways of understanding the Mishnah. But ubehegdem, before that, the Gemara began quoting a din of Rav Chizda. And Rav Chizda said that when a hen is laying an egg on Shabbos, on one hand one may not move and bring a keli to place it under the hen in order for the egg to fall in the utensil, in the vessel. That's something that may not be done. That's actually very similar to the Mishnah's din that you can't move a keli to put it under a lamp to receive oil. The egg, an egg that's born on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, as we'll learn in the beginning of Masechtas Beya, has the din of muktzah. However, Rab Chizda made an exception. Rab Chizda says that you are allowed to move a keli and to bring it and to turn it over the egg is not in it, but it's over the egg in order to protect the egg from getting trampled, from getting ruined, from getting lost. That's the din of Rab Chizda. Now, Rabbah, and again we're learning the way Rashi explains, Rabbah will subscribe to the din that we'll learn more about today, which is the first explanation Rashi brought in the Mishnah, which will both explain the Mishnah and explain the basic din of Rab Chizda that ein keli nital b'Shabbos elo letzoyrech davar hanital, that you can only move a vessel that's not muktzah for something else that's not muktzah. Interesting rule. Now you can move a cup because you want to eat. Food is not muktzah. You're going to use the cup to put in a liquid. Liquid is not muktzah. Good. But since, let's go to the case of Rab Chizda, an egg is muktzah, you may not move a vessel for muktzah. That's a very limiting halacha. That's a very broad application of muktzah. Okay. Problem will be, if indeed Rab Chizda subscribes to that rule, ein keli nitel b'Shabbos elo l'tzoyrech davar hanital, then why is it that Rab Chizda makes an exception? Why can you bring that keli and cover the egg? So here we learned a big exception to the rule. And b'lashon haGemara hatzola mitzuya hitiru, that whenever you're taking a precaution that's needed to prevent a commonplace loss, if the loss is something common, then there is an exception. And as the Gemara explained, that for a hen to lay an egg on an inclined area, meaning that if you're not going to put a keli, the egg is going to right away roll away and get lost. That's something not that common. But even when the egg is laid on flat ground, but it's laid out there in the public, many people are in the area, many animals are in the area, and if that egg will not be covered, commonly the egg is going to be trampled upon and lost. And that's the difference between you can't put a keli under, you could put a keli over. Now we are in the middle of learning a series of questions against this rule that ein keli nitel b'Shabbos elo l'tzoyrech davar hanital. So we're going to continue learning questions, both from we learned from yesterday from Mishnayos and from Braisa against this rule, but the rule is standing, as well as the exception. Now what we're going to continue today is to learn another approach in understanding the din of Rab Chizda, which is again that you cannot move a keli to put it under the egg to capture the egg while it's being laid. And that explanation, this other explanation, will be another explanation to the rule in the Mishnah that you cannot move a vessel on Shabbos to receive oil that might drip out, flow over from a lamp. And that is, as we also spoke at yesterday, the rule that you cannot be mevatel a keli me heichonoi. Guys, remember, it's muktzah, muchan. These are the 2 opposite sides of the coin. Muchan is what we want. Muchan means something is prepared to be used. Muktzah means it was the opposite. It was set aside for it not to be used. A keli that's muchan means a keli that's not muktzah. So the concept will be is that you cannot make a keli that was previously muchaned for Shabbos. you can't nullify its status of being mukhan. You can't render it muksa, and we're going to speak out more details that when the egg is inside the keli, and similarly when the oil that spilled out of the lamp on Shabbos falls into the keli underneath it, that vessel underneath it, that vessel that's holding the egg at that moment will become muksa. So what you basically did is that you nullified the keli from its state of preparedness. That will be the other way of explaining the Mishnah. We're going to also have various challenges back and forth against that opinion. And finally, Rabbi Yitzchak, who is the source of Rabba's explanation in Rab Chizda. Rabbi Yitzchak is the one that introduces the concept. Rabbi Yitzchak is an Amayra from Eretz Yisrael. That ein keli nitel b'Shabbos ella l'tzoyrech davar hanitel not only subscribes to this halacha, he authored that halacha, but he doesn't agree that there are any exceptions. In other words, Rabbi Yitzchak actually holds, in the case of the hen and the egg, not only may you not place a keli under the egg while it's laying the egg, under the hen while it's laying the egg, after the egg is laid, you may not move a keli and turn it over the egg to protect it. There are no exceptions. He does not subscribe to the rule that Hatzalah Mitsuya Hitiru. Now, this is going to lead us into the bigger machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, which will be a machlokas that we will quote throughout the sugya of muksa, including there are many other arguments that we have b'negei Hilchos Shabbos that we're also going to read about today. Davar she'ein mischaven, whether it's asur, whether it's mutter. We're going to have them question. These are the words: Rabbi Yehuda is lei muksa, Rab Shimon leis lei muksa. And as we very importantly point out, everyone subscribes to the muktzah concept. When we say that the Tana Rab Shimon leis lei muktzah, all that means is that he does not accept that there is a broad application to muktzah. He only has a very narrow application to muktzah, as we'll see today an example. And throughout, as we keep on learning, we're going to have many, many other examples where Rab Shimon is a lot more lenient because he only clarifies or characterizes muktzah in a very limited way. Rabbi Yehuda has a much broader application of muktzah. We will also speak about today in the context of muktzah that a corpse is muktzah. Now, there are times that one needs to move a corpse because, for example, the corpse is in the sun and it's a very long Shabbos. And the concept of kavod hameis is very important to give honor to the corpse. There are times that it's not about you want to move the corpse, but you want to at least create a shade over the corpse. And based on the theme that we're learning today, that ein keli nitel b'Shabbos ela l'tzoyrech davar hanitel, that will disallow you from moving a mechitza, which is otherwise not muktzah. But if you're moving it only to cover the mace, then you are violating this rule. We're going to figure out ways to circumvent it. If you remember, we learned that not long ago, Shabbos Daf Lamed, we had that whole Gemara of David HaMelech passing away, who passed away on Shabbos, and they also did not want for the body of David HaMelech to be in the sun. V'chulei, it's going to be connected to that sugya and much, much more. So again, let's start. Shabbos Daf Mem Gimel on the 5th line of the top of the Amid. So we are concluding Rabba's explanation in the din of Rab Chizda. Again, Rab Chizda says that if a hen is laying an egg on Shabbos, you're not allowed to move a vessel under the hen to receive the egg, but after the egg is on the ground, you can move a vessel and put it over the egg to protect the egg. Okay, based on the rule again, ein keli nitel, etc., but with the exception, with the heter of Hatzalah Mitsuya Hitiru. So again, it says in the Mishnah, guys, 5 lines from the top of the Amid, that if you have a leakage, that means that there is a opening in one's roof and water is leaking into the house. So what do we do today? You bring a bucket, you bring a keli, at least the water that falls in the house should not go all over the place. The Mishnah says you are allowed to do it. The Kasha of the Gemara is based on the premise that water that is leaking through the roof will be so dirty that you can't drink it. If it's taka undrinkable, then it's muksa, and there's no purpose to it. And 1 second, how can you say that you can't move a keli for something that's muksa? Here the Mishnah says you are allowed to move the bucket. So the Gemara answers, again, this is following Rabbah, who has this exception. That's how he explains Rab Chizda, that Hatzalah Mitsuya Hitiru, that this is common. That bebate chadati, that when you have a new home, the shchiche, the dalfi, it's common for there to be leakages. I know here in LA, when you build a new home, it's very common that in the beginning there are cracks on the wall. In other words, the home settles. I don't think it's common with today's construction for there to be a leak. Oy Gewalt, the builder will be in a bit legal trouble, or whatever. He definitely will not get a Shem Tov. But then it was common. When you build a house, in those days, you needed a couple of rains to discover all of the holes in the roof for you to patch it up. But it must be in such a case. Now, how do you define common or uncommon? This is the general challenge that the later generations had in applying the dinim of the Gemara. The Gemara gives you a concept. Hatzalah Mitsuya is okay. If it's not common, it's not okay. How do you define common? By learning all this. So the more cases you have, the more you figure out where to draw the line and thus how to apply it to new cases. Okay, Atkan, Rabba's explanation in the din of Rab Chisda. Now Rabbi Yosef is giving the other explanation that we mentioned. It's called Bittul Keli Mehechani. He has another way of understanding Rab Chisda, which also will explain the Mishnah. Okay, Rabbi Yosef Amar, what's the reason of Rab Chisda? Why may you not place a vessel under the hen to accept the egg? And on the other hand, you are allowed to move a vessel to cover the egg. Mishum de kamavatal keli mehechanoim. This is great. So the keli, the cup, the bowl, the utensil that you're using, prior to Shabbos was muchan. It was prepared. Doesn't mean that it was specifically this bowl was set to be used on the Shabbos. It doesn't mean that. It means that a bowl is used to eat from. You can eat on Shabbos. It wasn't only made for Shabbos, but it was also made for Shabbos. That's the best muchan. Eating utensils are muchan. Now, what happens when you have muktzah in it, while it's in it, and it's not only in it, without you making an effort, it won't go off it by itself, right? The egg is inanimate. We're going to have another case later where you have chicks jumping on baskets to get into their little home. That's different because they jump on and they themselves jump off. Here, once the egg is in there, without another mice, it's going to remain in there. So what's the din? At that time, we said this yesterday, we're going to follow that on. It's called a basis l'davar ha'asur. And while it's holding the egg, the vessel also may not be moved. It's muktzah. One second, and who cares? And you can't be mevatel like Kedem Yichari. Why? Okay, so you made it muktzah. So many people say, because you ruined the keli. Well, you didn't ruin the keli. You didn't break anything. So Rashi, in the Mishnah, writes Gavaldika words. If you look inside the middle of the Rashi, in the Mishnah, Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, Rashi says that again, he's quoting now Rav Yosef, that the reason why you cannot put a keli under the lamb, because asur levati keli meichane, and by the way, it's the same thing. Oil, we said, is muktzah. If the oil is going to fall into the keli, then that vessel that's holding the muktzah oil will also become muktzah. And so what? Misham, you can't do something that makes a keli immovable, unmovable, because muktzah, by the way, doesn't mean you can't touch it. Muktzah means you can't move it. And look at the words of Rashi. Because when you have a keli and you make it muktzah, means from now on you cannot move the utensil. It's as if you connected that utensil with clay, with super glue to the ground. V'dami l'melacha. It's like malacha. Now, what malacha is Rashi referring to? Shloima, many people say binyan. Wow. Now, there is a Rashi almost at the end of the Masechta, I think it's in Daf Kuf Nun Daled, that's speaking about a similar case about putting out pillows, that if there's some broken pieces of, let's say, glass, if it's going to fall, it should fall on the pillow. That's also involved with you're being mavatal keli mehechane. Dear Rashi says that by doing so, you're being soiser. And there's a lot to do with here, it's mashma that it's because of binyan, there it's mashma because of soiser. Point is, just to make it clear, the Pnei Yeshua has a whole Torah over here. Here in our case, we're speaking about a keli receiving oil, a keli receiving an egg. At the moment that it received oil or the egg, it's still functioning as a keli. What's a keli made for? To be makabel. It's makabel the oil, it's makabel the egg. You can't call that soiser because it's serving its purpose. The dama l'malacha means that since it's muksa, you can't move it, it's as if you built it into the ground. On Daf Kuf Nun Daled, when we're speaking about another isur that you can't put out a pillow, right, to receive broken pieces of glass, which are muktzah. There, the problem is that a pillow was made for, let's say, laying on. When it became dangerous, you can't use it for what it was meant to be used for. Then you're being mavatal the purpose of that keli. That's taka called soiser. But be that as it may, this is the approach of Rab Chizda, that you can't do something that's going to be mevatel like Keli Meichane. Okay. Now, by the way, there are no exceptions over here. But this also explains, why does Rab Chizda allow you to put the keli over the egg? Why not? Why not? When the keli is over the egg, it's not a basis for something that's muksa. Muksa is not in it. It's not supporting the muksa. You're doing nothing wrong. You're not mevatel the keli meichane. If you don't subscribe to the din that you can't move a keli for muksa, makes sense why Rab Chizda gives the exception.
Right, but they want to pick up the keli because they will be careful for the eggs.
Doesn't matter. But since halachically you are allowed to pick it up, you're not. It's not keilu you're machabered betit in the ground binyan. Azoi vayt from binyan. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Malachenu shakolim dvarim. What we're going to have now, and on the next sheet of Rabbi Yitzchak, is almost quoting all of the Mishnayos and Braisen that we quoted yesterday. Again, it's a machaya, so if we get to review it. And now we're going to challenge the din of Rabbi Yosef. So, how can you subscribe to the rule that you're not allowed to be mevatel keli meichane on Shabbos when it says in a brayso? Guys, we had this yesterday. Chavish al tevel. If you have a barrel of tevel, we're speaking about liquid tevel, so wine or oil that needs to be tithed. Prior to tithing it, you may not consume it. Prior to tithing it, you may not benefit from it. We rabbinically may not separate Trumas u'Maiseres on Shabbos. So basically, it's muksa and shenishbara, and it broke. You have something of value, and it's spilling out. The Braisa says you are allowed, maybe keli acher, you are allowed to bring another keli, umaniach tachteha, and you put it under this broken barrel in order for you, right, not to lose the contents, and you're doing this on Shabbos. Now think about it, when that wine, when that oil, which is right now tevel, muksa, falls into the new keli, you are mevatel this new keli mehechane. Right now you won't be allowed to use it, to move it. So answers the Gemara Amalei. This is all Rabbi Yosef standing up for his opinion. This is a huge chiddush what we're learning now, that even though tevel may not be consumed, it's not muksa on that level. Tevel muchenu eitzel Shabbos. Tevel, as far as the dinim of, is it muksa or is it muchan, has a din of muchan. Why? 1 second, you may not even have hana from tevel, and you may not tithe it on Shabbos. We're going to have that in Mishnah. It's like a tikkun midrabanan. So he says, because she'im avar v'tiknoi misukan. Because if someone went ahead and violated this rabbinic law and did separate Trumas u'Maiseres, so then that separation on Shabbos is effective. Let me use these words, my friend. There's a gavra and a chefza. Some things are muksa because they are inherently muksa, for all of the reasons. You know, the relatively lenient muksa, klisha malachta le'isr, but you can use for something else. Or the more serious muksa, chesren kis, no one will use it for anything other than the isur. Something that's not even a keli, that's even worse. The item is muksa. Tevel is food. Food that's edible is not muksa. 1 second. But there is a din that I must separate Trumas u'Maiseres. There is this isur on me that I, on Shabbos, may not do it. The isur of not separating is on me, which is why if I went ahead and I did it, it's effective. Chavra, you should know this is a very, very big statement. And everyone brings other scenarios. The Tosfos over here can't get enough of this. Tosfos is saying that, first of all, it's not so simple. Tosfos says that we're going to learn later that only if someone was mafresh Trumas u'Maiseres b'shoigig, is that separation effective, and now you can eat the tevel. If someone did it b'mezid, even though they only violated the rabbinic law, they may not eat it. And here the Gemara doesn't seem to differentiate. It says a statement, she'im avra v'tiknei mesukan. And many other questions on the statement. The bottom line will be, there's another nuance over here, and that is, and we're going to learn about this in other areas when we're going to learn more about the separations of Trumas u'Maiseres, that it doesn't necessarily have to be done physically. A person can separate Trumas u'Maiseres, the machshava, and according to some Rishonim, and to make a declaration that the oil that's on the right side of the barrel is Truma. That's another nuance. So since he doesn't have to do anything biyodayim, he doesn't have to make a physical change, that also renders it, so to say, less muksa. Even though you may not do that on Shabbos. Okay. All right, back in the Gemara. Another question. Now this question It's coming from a Mishnah that we didn't quote yesterday. I'm sorry, I take that back. We did quote that yesterday. So Nachamal, we learned in the Mishnah Kasha that if you have a lamp and for whatever reason sparks are flying out, which is not that common, or at least we learned that yesterday. It's not a torch, a normal lamp. But sometimes, for whatever reason, there was water in the oil, the wick was not so good. Sparks are flying out. You don't want the sparks to fall on your wooden floor. So the Mishnah says that you are allowed to put a keli. Normally earthenware kelis are good protectors of fire. They would have pots out of ceramic. They wouldn't get burnt. They would just get, blackened. You can move them to be mekabel in its Here I have the same kasha. The premise of the question is that a spark is muktzah. It's like fire. While the spark is in the keli is muktzah. So you're mevatel the keli mehechanai. So answers the Gemara, Amar Afuna, B'reid Rabbi Yeshua. It's not only because the spark will be shortly lived. He's saying even more. While the spark is in the keli, because of us viewing the spark as something that ain't bohem mamish, it's again a big statement. How do we view fire? Like from the four elements, what element is the closest to ruchnias? Shamayim, right? We learned there's two opinions what the word shamayim means. Either eish umayim or sham mayim. But from the four elements, eish and mayim are ruchniasdik. And eish doesn't have substance like water. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, we have in Chassidus 10 reasons why the neshama is like a fire. Fire is unique. Fire is the only element that goes against gravity. The gravity is lamaylam. Fire is going up. Fire is the only thing that we have in this world that no matter how much it gives of itself, it doesn't get diminished. When you have water, if you have 5 ounces here and you pour it to another cup, if you pour an ounce, you're going to have 1 ounce less. When you have a candle, you can light 1,000,000 candles, doesn't lose anything. No, it's a nitzoitz. Fire is considered something that's not mamashazdik. Now, what about carrying a flame on Shabbos? We'll learn about that later, but at least let's go to the nitzoitzes. There's no mamashas, and therefore it's not muktzah. And therefore, while the keli has the spark in it, it's not muktzah. It's not a basis to something that's muktzah. You are not mavatal anything. Another kash. This we had on top of the Amid, right? If you have a beam in your house and it broke, imagine you're looking up. Today you have these ceilings, you don't even see what's going on underneath it, but there's a beam, and the beam is cracking. You don't want the beam to fall down. So you can take either a safsel, a bench, you can take a aruchais hamita, you can take a bed and you stand the bed. It's called a side post. The safsel also, you're standing it up. No, it's a short roof. You're standing up a keli, and it's supporting the beam. Now guys, any broken item is muktzah. Just begin with that. It's a beam, it's made for construction. That beam is muktzah. You are allowed to move a bed or a bench for muktzah. But one second, isn't it while it's there, you're being mavatl keli mehichanoi? So the Gemara answers a very important rule. If something is under muktzah, and you can easily move it out, you are allowed to do so. In other words, if something becomes a basis for muktzah, like you put money in a drawer, the only thing in there is dollars, that's muktzah. The drawer now is a basis to muktzah. Here, it must be derafeh, that when you put up the bench or you put up the bed, it's not supporting it shtarik, that the beam, the muktzah is sitting on it. It's a little bit of a support. In case it's going to break more, then it's not going to fall on your head. But it's not the case where it becomes unmovable. It's very easily movable. It's loose. The ibaya shakalei, that's the only reason why you are allowed to do it. Another question.
Why in all of these scenarios are we not concerned that once we open the door and let him do these things to correct the case of this, that he's going to come to do something more?
Okay, by the way, Tzemach, you're making a good point, and again, we have to push it, learn more. No, it's as we'll see that there are times that we say exactly what you're saying. I think that's the reason of the beauty of us learning a lot, even though we're not going in depth, is that because Tzemach, we have to put together all of the Mishnais and Baraisen. If someone would be able to do it. Like where are all the cases where Chazal says, if you do this, you'll do that? Where is it that they didn't say it? I think if we would have it all in our head, we'll get some sort of good picture of where to draw the line. You're right, you're pointing out that sometimes, and there has to be reasons. I think we just need to chop it a lot of more cases, clearer in the forefront of our minds. Next, it says, that's how we began today, a Mishnah from Shabbos. You can put a keli under water that's dripping through a leak on Shabbos here, same also. Again, the premise is the water is muktzah, because it's dirty, and you're being mavatal lekele meichanoi. So the Gemara answers, it must be that the Mishnah is only speaking about bedela fara'oi. Who told you that when water goes through a leak in the roof, it's undrinkable? Lav dafka. It depends on the roof.
Especially new roofs.
Especially if I care, the way we learned before, the roof is not that dirty. It must be that the water is still drinkable, and therefore it's not muktzah. Next, says in a Braisa, next kashem, and now this is a new din that we didn't have before. The Braisa says, you have a chicken coop, or if you have some other area in your property where certain birds rest, sometimes it's built a little bit high up because you don't want the other animals to be able to get in there. Challenge is, how do these little birds get in there? Well, when the birds are bigger, they can fly, but when the birds are little, they need like a stepping stool. So you are allowed to put, a sala basket. It's not made for it. It's a basket, but you can flip over the basket. You can put it lifnei ha'efreichem in front of the young chicks, in order sheyalu v'yerdu. Now here also, a bird, just an oral chevra, bal chai is muktzah, even if you own it. If a person owns a pet, they may not move it on Shabbos. It's bona fide muktzah. So here, while the little efroyach is on top of the basket, it's a base for muktzah. So what? You can't put it under the hen to chop the egg, but you can put the sal for the efroichim? You're being mevatel kelimei chanoi. So here's very important, like we mentioned before. Here we're speaking about a living being. They don't stay there for the rest of Shabbos. When the little efroyach, when the little bird jumps on the basket, it's not that if you won't take it off, it's going to stay there. No. It's only going to be there temporarily. Now this goes into a very big topic. And the very big topic is, let's say it by heart. We're going to paskin that if something was a base for muktzah during the period of Bein HaShmashos, then we say that kivin the iskatsoy lebein HaShmashos is katsoy for the entire Shabbos. If something during Bein HaShmashos was not a base for muktzah, it was not muktzah. During Shabbos it became muktzah, like in our case. At 10 a.m. the chick jumped on the basket. While it's on the basket it's muktzah, but when it goes off the basket, it goes back to being not muktzah. Now I know that this is really going to be a machlokes and masechtas beitza, whether there's part muktzah. We are following that, there's only part muktzah. There can be something that's muktzah for a little bit of Shabbos, and then we don't say that it's going to be muktzah for the rest of Shabbos unless it was muktzah bein hashmashos. So that's the big difference. When I put the keli, let's go back to what Rashi said. Rashi says that if you make something into a base for a muktzah, since you can't move the base, it's as if you are machabered betit. So it's doime to binyan. Or Rashi kufnun daler, or mamash at the end of the Masechta, doime listira. You're breaking the keli, you can't use the keli. That it's going to remain unmovable for the remaining of Shabbos. If you're not putting the chick on it, you're putting the basket on the ground. You're causing takatz indirect that there's going to be an afroyach that might jump on it. You know what? It might jump off it as well. That's the answer. And just think about it, kosovar. We hold this brisa follows the opinion that when the efroyach jumped off, then mutar letaltaloi. It doesn't bother me that for a couple of minutes it's going to be a buses to muksa. We learned in a brisa that in such a case, mashma, that even after the efroyach jumped off, asur letaltaloi. It says the Gemara, that's not the pshat over there. That brisa only means that while the chiclet is on the basket, ba'oidan olav, then it's muksa. We learned in another brisa, va'afal pisha ein oidan olav asur, that if the basket was a base for a living creature, even after the efroyach went away, the basket remains muksa. Amar ababo, that's different. That was only ba'oidan olav kol bein hashmashos. And that's the rule, migu, the iskatsoy, lebein hashmashos, since something was considered muksa during the beginning of Shabbos, beginning meaning not the beginning of night, but during the period of bein hashmashos, with all of the big opinions of it, we're going to speak about this another time. Does it have to be taka, the whole bein hashmashos, which is mashma? Does it have to be at the last moment of bein hashmashos? Just that we don't know when that is. Then iskatsoy l'kula yoimam. Okay. So Bekitzer, we had Rav Chizda, lenient and stringent. You could cover the egg. You cannot be makabel the egg. We had Rabba's explanation, which was based on the rule Ein Keli Nitl B'Shabbos Elo L'Tzoyrech Keli Anitl. We have now the other understanding of Rabbi Yosef Bitl Keli Meichanoi, and now we're going to have a shita that argues with Rav Chizda. And the Gemara again is going to use all of the Mishnayos and Braisos to challenge this third opinion. You know what this third opinion is? There are no exceptions. This third opinion is a lot more stringent. I agree with Rab Chizda. You may not move a keli to put it under the hand, so when the egg is laid, it's going to go into some sort of receptacle. You may not do that. Like the first white line, but I'm going to go further. You may not even move a keli. Now, guys, you can't say bittel keli meichane, because when the keli is over the egg, it's not a base to the egg. You are allowed to remove it. So obviously, Rabbi Yitzchak subscribes, he's like the ground zero for the rule that ein keli nitl b'Shabbos, only for something that's not muksa, but he doesn't give an exception. He doesn't say by hatzola mitsuya hitiru. He doesn't agree to that. Because Rabbi Yitzchak is the one that holds ein keli nitl elol davar nitl b'Shabbos. Without exceptions, no dispensations. Now, again, he's saying even more than Rabba's understanding in Rab Chizda. So many works of Tanoim, Mishnayos, Braisen, everything that we learned, until now, again, different cases where we are allowed. So the Gemara says in the second white line, Meisvei kol haneti, we don't even have to repeat it. All of the works of Tanoim were brought up in the Beis Medrash to challenge Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, guys, appreciate something, that when it came to Rabba, the answer was always that all of these cases, that it's a common loss. But he doesn't subscribe to a common loss. So he needs a whole new answer. And he gave a whole new answer. Vishonei, he answered, or they answered on his behalf, B'tzarech l'mekoymai, u'ah. Tzarech l'mekoymai means like this, that even when something is deemed muksa, this is not a blanket statement. Sometimes, if you need the place where the muksa is on, like if you have muksa on your table sometimes, then you are allowed to pick up the muksa, to take the muksa away, because you need that place. Now, step number 2, that's important, that the Gemara takes it for given. Once muksa went into your hand, ba'oifen hamuter, that's l'kula alma, ba'oifen hamuter, so I need the table. So here, let's say this would be muksa. So I remove it from the table. What, do I have to drop it the moment I left the table? No. Since I picked it up a heter, not everyone says it has to be only when you picked it up a heter, but everyone agrees to that. Once it's in my hand, I can put it down wherever I want. So let's say it's raining, and let's go that the rain is muksa. If the bucket is already in my hand, why? Because I needed the tzarech mekoymai, then I can put it down wherever I want. Gewaldig. Huh? No, Rabbi Yitzchak is an Amoyre from Eretz Yisrael, as was Rav Chizda. No, that's a good night. That's why, and I'm saying if Rabbi Yitzchak would have been a Tana, then Rabbi Chizda would have been refuted. How can Rabbi Chizda argue with? Toshima, let's go further. It says in a Braisa, third line, Achas beitza shenoldu b'Shabbos, v'achas beitza shenoldu b'Yomtiv. Steht in the Braisa, ein metaltalin. We may not move the egg. We're speaking about the egg. Not lachasas bayaklino, guys. An egg is the perfect utensil cover. If you don't have the types of utensils that we have today, which is so abundant, think about it. If you have a jug, something that has a cover, makes sense that sometimes eggs would perfectly prevent from something dirty from falling in there. But you can't move the egg to cover the keli, nor can you move the egg. You should know, my friends, that an egg that's placed lengthwise, the egg that's raw, is structurally strong enough to uphold a lot of weight. But you have to get it on the right angle. If you get it on the wrong angle, you'll just have a mess. So imagine a person's kari amit, you have a bed, the leg of the bed broke. You want to sleep not inclined, you want to sleep straight, so they would use an egg, herst. Now, how much can you turn back and forth? Don't turn by biroyik. I don't know, but you can't do that. Why? Because the egg is muktzah. Avol, koifa, olive kli. Beferish, you can take another keli, turn it over it, bishvil shaloi tishaver. I ain't keli nitil. The answer again will be that you're right. If I'm taking up the bowl only to cover the egg, I'm not allowed to do it. But if I picked up the bowl because I wanted to clear my table, now the bowl is in my hand. I know that moving something from muksa is a muksa problem. I know that, but it's already in my hand. Once it's already in my hand, then I can put it over the egg. Tashumat says in a braisa, person machzolois al gabe yavonim b'Shabbos, stones. Some stones that you want to later use in construction, you don't want it to get muddy or dirty. So what happens if it's about to rain? So it says the Braisa that you are allowed to spread out mats. Now guys, mats are not muktzah, but you're spreading out the mats on top of the avanim. Here again, he holds that ein keli nitel elo l'tzorich davar nitel. Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't even have. See, when it comes to Rabbi Chizda, when it comes to Rabbah, I'll give you an explanation. You know why? Because it's a mitzuya. If you live in Miami, where it rains Nebuch on them every day, so the Mitzuya that you have to cover things. But he doesn't subscribe to, there's no dispensation. So answers the Gemara, it must be that this whole Braisa is only ba'avanim mikur zalois, the toilet paper of the times of Chazal, were certain types of sharp stones, and even though stones normally are muktzah, but these stones, because of kavod habriyos, are not muktzah. We're going to have details, how many, v'chulei. But it's stones that, being that they will be used for a person to clean oneself, it's not muktzah, and that's why you can move a mat to cover over the chazin lebeis hakisim. Tashema nochabraisa person machatzolois al gaba leveinim b'Shabbos. You are allowed to move mats to cover leveinim are bricks. Again, people never used bricks for the toilet paper. So what's going to be the answer here? So the Gemara answers, it must be that the ishtiur mi binyana, that bricks that are designated for construction are bona fide muksa. But once you have a building site where the building was done, and there are always some leftovers, and it's common that people use the leftover building construction, like these bricks, for you to lean upon. People used to sit down, they would lean. So sometimes like it's a handle of a chair. They would use it for some sort of sitting purpose, which was common, therefore it's not muktzah. The chazyan, it's good, it's fit. Lemizga. Lemizga means what we do on Pesach by the Seder. We recline. Alayu. 3 lines from the bottom. Weiter Tashema. Frag the Gemara. It says, person machatzelas al gabe kaveres devorim b'Shabbos. We are allowed to spread a mat over a beehive on Shabbos. Now, what's the issue with the beehive? Just to make it clear, guys. Bees, we just mentioned today. Balachayim are muktzah. Honey is food. Food is not muktzah. So the premise will be that a beehive is muktzah, farvos, because it has bees in it. Again, if we're going to go with Rabbi Yitzchak, and there's no heter, a blanket rule, ein keli nitel b'Shabbos elo l'tzoyrich davar hanitel, then why would you be allowed, which we are allowed, to spread a mat over a kaveres, over a biyah b'Shabbos? Now, why would you do that? Why would you need to do it? B'chama b'pnei achama. The havamina means that during the summer months, to protect the biyah from the sun, that's the havamina. We'll teach it a little bit different soon. B'kshamim b'pnei akshamim. B'kshamim, the havamina means during the winter, to protect it from the rain.
Also makes sense.
Wait. Ubelvad shalei schaven lotzu. Now, there's another issue. The other issue is that when you fully cover a beehive, if there are bees in it, it gets trapped. Now I want to mention, Bekitzer, it's a small daf, so I'm not worried about the time, but we got to get moving, that when I do an act, even according to Rab Shimon, that holds that davar she'ein mischaven is mutter, I'm covering it from the rain. I don't want it to get wet. I don't want it to get hot. But if it's a psik reishe, if for sure my action will prevent the bees from flying out, then not having kavana lotzud doesn't even help. So the fact that the Braisa writes that as long as you don't have intent to trap the bees, you are good, that's something that is going to be further elaborated when we're going to learn the Pedic about trapping. There's a big chiddush of many Rishonim, guys, listen to these words, that even though the klal is Abaye v'Rava the Amri Tarvayu afilu Rab Shimon moide b'psik reisha v'lo yomos that you chayiv chatos, it's also midoiraisa, not by trapping. Trapping is going to be an exception, that if your kavana is not to trap, it's not called trapping. Just remember these words for later when we learn about the dinim of trapping. But you can't have kavana. So again, the problem is, again, muksa, answers the Gemara, you got it. There's honey. Who told you there's no honey? A beehive has honey. Now the fact that there are also bees doesn't bother me. There's honey in there. I'm moving the mat to protect the honey. The problem is you have to know the mitzias of beehives. It's mashma, we're speaking both summer and winter. That's going to be the problem. Amalei Rav Ukvan from the city of Meishon, we just had him before, to Rav Ashi, that makes sense during the summer months, that beehives have honey in them, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, since the Ikar Devash. The Devash is Davar Hanitel, so you're moving a Keli L'Davar Hanitel. But the Vaisak Shamim, that's the way of the world, that during the winter season, the Leka Devash, you have bees without the honey, Ma'ikalo Meimar. So let's learn a little bit more about beehives. Chavre, when you remove the honey from the beehives, not only would you remove the honey, but there's something called a honeycomb, which is like, it's like shaiva. It's not like, it's wax, it's waxy, but it's something that's very valuable, I think, and it's edible. So not only would you remove the honey, you would remove the honeycombs, but since bees live on in the beehive during the winter, you would leave for the bees, you would leave, it's called tu chalois devash. So says the Gemara, loy, nitzrecha ela lo'oisen shtei chalois. That since, very nice picture, since even when you remove the honey at the end of the summer, going into the winter, there isn't honey, but you left two, that's the minig. For Shabbos lechem mishnah, you would leave two chalois for the honeys, that's food. So even the Maisak Shamim, there is something that's Davar Hanitel. Problem is, if you left it for the bees, then it's muktzah, it's not muchem. That's because it was set aside for the bees. So now we're already going into a little bit of a doichik. So it must be that when does the Braisa say you can cover a honeycomb no matter when? Only if prior to Shabbos, the chashiv alayu. In other words, you have to plan to use the honeycombs. You needed to have an intent prior to Shabbos that made the honeycombs muchan. How do you do muchan? By having a machshava, because it's edible. Just in case I'll be hungry, I'm going to go get some of those honeycombs. That's a doichik, but the way we're going to approach it is, okay, what does that imply? That whole loy chashav alayu, in other words, if you didn't have that step prior to Shabbos, then you're takamoida that during the Yemaisak Shamim, you may not cover it with a mat. If that is the case, when the Braisa goes on to make a qualification, what was the qualification? You can do it, but not in a certain case. Guys, there's a big rule when you learn that whenever you want to qualify something, you want to stay as near as possible to the original case. That's the best qualification. That even in this scenario, if it's a little bit different, you can't do it anymore. The qualification was, don't have kavana to trap. Don't even touch trapping. It would have been much closer, a much better qualification to say that when are you allowed to cover it if prior to Shabbos you had machshava to eat some of the honeycombs if you'll need. The Braisa says, so why not? When are you allowed to do it? Only if you had a mind to take the honeycombs. That should have been the better qualification. The Gemara challenges the premise. That's not a better qualification. Samach here again, the same thing you were saying before. Like, how do you write Braisas? You have to push it, learn more. This is the right qualification. It's better to say that even if Chishav Aleim, you may not use it if your machshav is latzud. That's a better qualification. Gemara is still not happy. Why are we not happy? Because who is the author of this Braisa? Or according to whose opinion does the author of the Braisa follow? Which opinions are we referring to? Either Rab Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda. In the Machlokes, davar she'ein eschaven, whether it's completely permissible, Shitas Rab Shimon, or Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that it's also midrabanan. Guys, don't confuse. Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, also Machlokes. Rab Shimon is also lenient, but there it's midoraisa or midrabanan. Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, Rabbi Yehuda chayiv, Rab Shimon poiter, pater avolaser. Davar she'ein eschaven is a notch lower. Even Rabbi Yehuda is only midrabanan, and Rab Shimon is mutter. So hold on. Mani, if our Braisa is Rab Shimon, I want to tell you something. According to Rab Shimon, you don't have to have intent. You don't have to have intent to eat it prior. It's interesting. Even though you left the two honeycombs for the bees over the winter, that's one of the good examples. What do we mean that Rab Shimon leis lei muktzah? He also holds of muktzah. He doesn't hold of the broad application of muktzah. That will be a good case. No, you never decided that I'll never take the honeycombs. You never had that in mind. That will be muktzah. Right? Chesron kiss. I'll never use it. You said it for the bees. Do you need to have a new special machshava that I will perhaps eat it on Shabbos? Only let Rabbi Yehuda, not let Rab Shimon. So if it follows Rab Shimon, leis le muksa. So you're coming and explaining the Braisa that it's the Chashav Alayu is a Haraya that you're saying that it follows Rabbi Yehuda. Now I got a bomb question. What does the Braisa say? Ubavat shelo yischaven. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't help if lo yischaven. Even if lo yischaven, midrabanan it's asur. Gavaldik. I Rabbi Yehuda ki lo yischaven mayave. Hodam shem yischaven asur. Takanat chayiv chatos. So it's like a checkmate. The Chashav Alayu means Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't work. So the Gemara says it works. No. This Braisa follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. You misunderstood the Braisa. When we said, and what we said, by the way, will be quoted later, when we're going to learn the Pedic about trapping, and we said, correct, according to many of the Shonim, that there's no psikresha, there's no issue of psikresha. When it says Ubavachalo Ischaven Lotzud, you know what that means? It's takanat psikresha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you fully covered the beehive, even though your intent is not to trap it, forget about psikresha, it's asur midrabanan. The case is that when you covered the beehive with the mat, you left some of the beehive exposed. They're taken, not trapped. Not that your intent was not to trap it. You left, it helps a lot. In other words, if it's going to get saturated with water, it's going to get ruined. If one edge will get wet, it's nishker for elach, and here the beast can take a leave. That's the meaning of the Braisa. It means, shelo yaseno kimitsuda. Don't make it like a trap. Trap means where you completely covered it. Don't cover it completely. What should you do? The lishboik lohurafcha, leave some of the chaveras open. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even if it's memela, it's asur anyways. It's loinas chaven, but it's asur. Don't get there. And the Braisa follows Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rav Ashi has a better answer. It was all of the back and forth, and you had machshava and all. No, it's simple. What was the premise? The premise of the question is, during the summer, no problem, because there's honey. The Braisa, speaking about winter, the Braisa never said Yumois HaGshamim. The Braisa never, we are assuming that Gshamim means Yumois HaGshamim. Says Rav Ashi, Miktani Bimois HaChama, or Bimois HaGshamim, then there would be a problem. No, the Braisa says that you can cover the kaveres Bachama, B'pnei HaChama, U'B'Gshamim, B'pnei HaGshamim. That's something else. Now guys, there are 2 seasons in the year, the spring and the fall, or let's call this Nisan and Tishrei. Like we know, sometimes it's more summer-like, sometimes it's more winter-like. That means it can be both hot and cold during Nisan. It can be hot and cold during Tishrei. There is honey both in Nisan and in Tishrei. What's the Braisa's case is that there's always honey. In other words, b'yoyim denisa. It means b'yoyim denisa b'yoyim de Tishrei. The ika chama, the ika gshamim. That's what the Braisa means. Why would you cover a honeycomb, a kaveres, a beehive? Because it's too hot or too cold, or too hot or rainy. But the Braisa only allows you to do it when ve'ika devash. Okay, it's gavaldik. So we have Rab Chizda, who was more lenient, who gave this heted that whenever there is a commonplace loss, right, you can cover it. And then we learned on Amadal of Rabbi Yitzchak, that he's really the source of this rule that ein keli nitel b'Shabbos ela l'tzoyrech davar hanitel, with no heter. And by all of that explains the Mishnah. So you can't put a keli under the lamp on Shabbos because the oil is muktzah. You're putting it to be mekabel the oil. You can't even move it to be mekabel muktzah. Says the Gemara, Amalu Rab Sheishes, Puku v'Amalu Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak is in Eretz Yisrael. I want you to tell Rabbi Yitzchak that you're right. And one of the ways we know someone is making a right statement, if another Amoida in another country who never spoke to him said the same thing, came to the same place, that's a good support. That kfar tirgama Rav Huna l'shmaitzech bebavel, what you said in Eretz Yisrael, not like Rab Chizda, no heter, but the concept that ein keli nitel b'Shabbos elo l'tzoyrech davar hanitel, Rav Huna came to the same place in Bavel. To Amar Rav Huna, now Rav Huna's case was the following. Now we're going to go a little bit into a mace and covered hamace, which happens. People pass away on Shabbos. Again, Daf Lamed, David HaMelech passed away. He was out there in the sun. That was one of the 2 questions. Let's come back to this. Oisin mechitza l'meis b'shvil chai. You can make a partition to protect the mace from the elements, from the sun, Bishvil chai, we'll see what that means. For the living, we'll see what that means. But ve'einois in mechitza lameis, bishvil meis. That is what Rav Huna said. Now, what does Rav Huna mean? And as we'll see right now, I don't get the picture yet, but we'll get there soon. Okay. That what does Rav Huna mean? Oh, they're a great picture. I take it back. Beautiful picture. The Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda v'chein tana shila marei. This is the Braisa that he quoted, quoting the Braisa. Meis hamutal b'chama. And what happens if a mace, if a corpse, it's going to putrefy? Now, that's not respectful for the mace, nor is it pleasant for the living people. So, boim shnei b'nei adam v'yoshvim b'tzida. You got to make this whole heter how to build a mechitza. Now, what's the issue? You can ask, guys, we're not speaking about a scenario where you may not carry. We're not talking about that. You would answer very simple. Move the mace. No, the mace you can't move. The mace is muktzah. Seder. So why didn't you bring a mechitza? Mechitza is not muktzah and cover the mace. You can't do that. That's the whole din. Because Rav Huna, like Rabbi Yitzchak, with no dispensations, hold ein keli nittel b'Shabbos elo l'tzoyrech davar hanittel. A mace is muktzah. If you can't move the mace, you can't move something for the mace. But look at the heter. Now I want to say like this, that the way out is going to go into another problem. The other problem is that we may not build. We may not build a building. We may not build an oil, a covering. And midrabanan, even if it's a temporary covering, it's called oil arai, is also something that may not be done unless it's done with a shinui. So listen to the chachma, how they're going to resolve it. Now, you can't say bishvil achai because it smells bad, because here we're speaking about it's out in the sun. So no one is outdoors. You can't say that we can find a heter. So what will be what's bishvil achai? So what do? You bring living people. That's what Rav Huna meant. You bring living people. You take two people, Shnei b'Adam, and Yoshvim b'tzidoi. One, Reuven sits to the right of the mace, Shimon sits to the left. If it's hot, the first thing that they will experience is that the ground underneath them is uncomfortable. So now, that will allow them to bring a bed or a bench, so they shouldn't sit on the hot ground. It's being brought for them. No problem. So cham lahem milmata, let them experience that it's hot underneath. And now, they're not doing it for the mace. This is a harama. They're finding a loophole. So now they already have a bench or a bed permissibly. Now let them experience the sun beating on their heads. So what do? Very simple. They're going to bring now a sheet, a mechitza, and they're going to spread it over Reuven and Shimon together. It's also going to be covering the mace. But they're doing it for them. Now let them experience, they have to experience some uncomfortability. And now, so first of all, they're building something for them. But let me get to Lashonis. It's Hasidish Lashonis. The building Arai, that's also is only Milmata Lamaila. The building aray that's permissible is milmaila lamata, because b'chlal, doing something in an unusual way always takes the issa down a notch. Something that's asur midoraisa, when you do a shaloy kedarkai, that's the rule. It becomes asur midrabanan. If something to begin with is asur midrabanan, when you make a shinoy, it becomes mutar completely. So people build, not God, of course, God is milmaila lamata. But how do people build? That's the whole Chassidus. We build milmata lamayla. How do you build? First you make the foundation. But if you build in a way where first you put the roof and then you build the walls around it, that's called a binyan milmayla lamata. Since it's only arai, which is only nisan midrabanan, it becomes mutter. So you have the sheet on top of you. Now they're holding the sheet with their hands up. So the covering is there. But underneath them is a bed. All they need to do now is to stand up. They're holding the sheet. They're taking the bed and they're standing it up. Now there's a support for the oil Reuven, support from the oil Shimon. It's covering the mace, and they can go gesund to hate and have Shabbos. They can leave. Let's go inside. So now they experience it. So maviyem machatzeles, they bring a sheet to person aleihem for them, and then zezoikev mitasoi, he stands up his bed v'nishpat. V'nishpat means he slips away. That's now all of this is needed because Rav Huna holds like Rabbi Yitzchak. If not for the din of ein keli nitel el tzarich davar nitel, who cares? Bring a sheet for the mace. The sheet, the mechitza is not muksa. Tarnished. Since you're bringing it for the mace, it's also. So the solution of Rav Huna is this way of bringing it for yourself. And indeed, itmar meis hamutel b'chama. Another solution, guys. There's something called tiltul min hatzad. Tiltul min hatzad many times is referred to kila achayad. I want you to know that in halacha there are different levels of kila achayad. But generally we're familiar with it, that even when something is muksa, you can't move it kedarkoi, but moving it indirectly, like we just mentioned, muksa is midrabanan. Moving it already in an unusual way normally brings it down, it's mutter. So another solution, if you have a mita mutal b'chama, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, move the mace out of the sun, not directly. The example that he gives of unusual is choif choim mita l'mita. Or if you have the mace on a mita, bring a bed next to it. Guys, we're in a yard that there's no issue of carrying. There's a mechitza, there's an eruv, and you lift the bed up, so the mace rolls into this bed. Then you move the bed over here. Then you lift it up again. You understand? That's just a way of moving the mace. It's considered relatively respectful, a lot better than having the mace lay in the sun. Move it shaloi kadar. Rav Chanina Bar Shalemiya, in the name of Rav, says, that is what we learned above with David HaMelech, Maniach all of kikarei tinoik, put on the mace something that is allowed to be moved. And this is, by the way, just an example. People think about a tinnik. The tinnik doesn't know that it's on a mace. Or bread, or any other item that you are allowed to move. Now the mace becomes a basis to something that's not muksa. My friends, this heter is only for covered hames. I want you to know that. Don't think that every time you have muksa, no problem, I'll put a piece of bread on top of the muksa, and God forbid. Again, covered hames has a lot of weight. Muksa is only midrabanan. So when you have an isur, it's a very strict drabanan. But it's a drabanan. Together with covered hames, that's when they allow it. Now, the Gemara wants to make it clear, if there is such an option, that is the better solution. Ki pligi, the leislei. If you don't have another non-muksa item that you can place on the corpse, so why does the one not give that solution? Because there is a machlokes whether tiltul menatzad is matir, moving muksa. Mar savar tiltul menatzad is still called tilt in a negative way. Tiltul means you're moving the muksa. Tarnished. Omar Savar, that since you're moving it minatzad, it's not deemed halachically that you're moving the muksa, and perhaps this question of tiltul minatzad is a machlokes tanoim. Leme ketanoi, it says in a brayso again about a mace. Ein matzilin as a mace. Mepnei hadleik. It's another case, not mepnei achama. Here there is a fire. So living people run out of the house. So how do you move the mace? Omar Rav Yehuda ben Lakish. This is Tanoim. That Shomati Shematzilin Asameis from Pnei Adlik. I heard that you could. And now the Gemara wants to understand, how do you do that? Hechinami. So like this. I'm sorry. Tanakama says Ein Matzilin. Tanakama says you may not. Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says you may. So now the Gemara says like this. If there is a kikar or a tinik, my Talmud the Tanakama. Again, everyone agrees that in this case, because of kavod hameis, when you make the mace into a basis, l'davar hamuter, you can carry the mace out properly. And eat the leke. So my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish must be, says the Gemara, elalav v'tiltul min atzad pligi, the mar savar tiltul min atzad shmei tiltul. And therefore, if there is no kicker or tinik, the Tanakama says ein matzilin. I'm sorry, Umar savar Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish holds Loi shmei tiltul, which is why you are allowed to do it. Look, that's a machlokes tanoim. Zok the Gemara nisht loy metan aleph. The kula alma tiltul min atzad shmei tiltul. Perhaps the chumrah you can't move it kila achayad. But v'hain utam lakish. Mace is unique, and guys, we're not speaking about mace in the sun. We're speaking about a mace in a fire. That means it's not that the corpse will putrefy. The corpse will disintegrate. That mitoich sha'adam bohul al mace. So a person will be very distressed if they'll see the tragedy of what they call today cremation. And you know what they're going to do? If you won't allow the person in the case where there is no way of doing it ba'ofen hamuter, there is no kikar tinug, they're going to come to put out the fire. Again, Samach, we don't always say this, but here we're going to say that. Because if we won't be lenient in a derabanan, people are going to come and be over on the Isser Derais and Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Shilo, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. I want you to know, Halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish b'meis. I'm going to add one, it's late. You should know that if there is no way of moving it min atzad, because of this concept regarding a mace, that Adam bohol al meisai, you can even move the mace directly, if there isn't time. But all of that is only mipnei hadleika. But coming back to the chama, that's a person is not bowl, it's not respectable. But there is where we learned above, you have to find a heter, either kick it or tinnik, or even tiltul min atzad, a lot more to be continued.